establishing platforms for sharing lessons and best practices at different levels, thus helping to build capacity, know-how, and relevant skills. And on this, I had read recently that Korea in the 15th century was already monitoring weather conditions with a large degree of precision, and was the first country to gather a compendium of agricultural practices in order to share it across the country, because different parts use different practices, and created a book for dissemination. So we are in the right place to be inspired for sharing best practices. And finally, we need to do this in order to enable enhanced communication pathways for the exchange and flow of climate-smart information and knowledge. And cognizant of these needs that are descending on us very rapidly in terms of knowledge, we are in talks with UNEP on the global adaptation networks, and I suppose now on APAN, as well as in other regions, to try to see how we can catalyze the existence of a virtual knowledge hub that can feed very smoothly into this new scaled-up adaptation context that we're heading to, because knowledge is invariably a very important building block that will lead us into this future. With this, I will close, and I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yusuf, and thank you all for 3 very interesting presentations. We have just a few minutes before coffee break. I'm going to give just a couple of reflections myself. Some themes that I heard is, first of all, there's some inherent causes of uncertainty and imprecision. First of all, we're talking about longer-term futures. So there's a need for multiple benefits from ecosystem-based adaptation so that people will want to continue protecting those ecosystems, not just because they're convinced of the adaptation benefits, but because there are other more immediate benefits they can get. There's a need for 100-year planning and thinking with the challenge of climate change. There's also the issue of long distances, with 10% of the global population depending on the local services of mountains, but 40% of the global population depending on them ultimately. And I also heard, along with that and consistent with that, a need for more knowledge and improved knowledge in order to handle these uncertainties, these large uncertainties that come from long time scales and large distances. We have now 6 minutes until the coffee break. So just a time for a couple of questions and fast answers. Are there any quick questions? I see one here. I see one here. Okay, 2 near the front. I'm sorry, just 2. Okay. And the microphone is coming.
Thank you very much. I'm Salim al-Haq, Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh. But I'm going to wear a separate hat and make a suggestion to the panelists. There's a new initiative that was jointly initiated by UNEP, WMO, and UNESCO called ProVIA, which is a program on vulnerability, impacts, and adaptation, to try and bring the scientific community together with the policymaking and practitioner community, particularly on adaptation and vulnerability and impacts as well. We've already done some work on research gap identification and guidance, which would be useful for the NAPs. I'm going to suggest maybe it might be worth thinking about how the scientific community, which is represented by several of the people on the panel, might be of assistance to the UNFCCC process in looking at the review of the target, the 1.5 degree or 2 degree target, which is up for review and will require inputs from the scientific community. The IPCC is not going to do this. Okay, so you're going to have to find another way of getting the scientific community on board, and I'm suggesting that ProVIA may be a good umbrella group to use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I've had a request from the panel that we just take questions, and then we spend the coffee break talking about them, either with people from the panel or others. That's all right? Okay, so we have a question here. Where's the microphone? Can you bring it over here? Can you raise your hand? Thank you.
It's very interesting to know UNFCCC is taking a lot of initiatives, particularly in adaptation. And in the last Doha meeting, I saw the temperature is not going to be lowered at 2 degrees, but maybe at 4 degrees. So with this, increased level of temperatures, and our adaptation also need to be of a different kind than what has been proposed since. So are there any review of your adaptation programs with this? And what is happening with respect to the mitigation aspect itself? Because there are many negotiations failing and not really forthcoming.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's a rather sobering reflection. If there are more questions, we'll take them now. There was one back there. Okay.
I'm Corazon Claudio from the Philippines, Earth Institute Asia. This is not so much a question, but a suggestion. We discussed this yesterday and today. What we are doing here is actually decision-making under uncertainty. I think we can benefit from the vast amount of knowledge and a lot of theoretical foundation from the field of decision analysis. If we are making a decision with outcome that cannot be realized or observed during our lifetime, then we cannot measure the decision based on the outcome, but rather on how faithfully it conforms with what we call decision basis, which includes the values and preferences of the decision makers, the vast amount of knowledge, the alternatives, and all of those. I suggest that we bring in the people from that field. The other comment is on the platform, not only consistent but common. Is there any attempt to have a common platform like Google where we can put all of these maps at the national level, at the international level? And lastly, terminology. We have many terms and concepts around. I think it's about time that we have a compendium of all of this so that when we are talking about something, we have a common way of handling these terms, the concepts and terms.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's a very good point. Decision-making uncertainty, there are techniques for doing this that are used successfully. I would argue, some special challenges with adaptation, but in general, yes, completely agree. In terms of platforms, I think it's fair to say that there's several. Okay, there's several, possibly too many, and there's a need to adapt to the large number of adaptation platforms. But it would be nice to have some more uniform ones. And is this what you're trying to do with AdaptNet?
Yeah. Thanks. I'll start since I've been pointed out by the moderator. Thanks for the very interesting points and comments. Acknowledged from Salim the importance of Provia and linking with the research community. Just to point out that in the adaptation world, the research community is and must be much more tightly linked with the practitioner community than it has been in the world of detection and attribution of climate change that has driven IPCC Working Group 1 and much of the past decades of climate work. So we face a new challenge of more integrated research and practicing. On the 4-degree world, the World Bank has come out with that statement. UNEP, at least institutionally, continues to believe that we have it within our ability as a global community to make the required reductions in emissions to keep global warming to 2 degrees. As all of us as adaptation practitioners know, we don't adapt to temperature change, global average temperature change anyway. What we adapt to are regional hydrological changes largely. And these can be very, very large, even in a 0-degree world, 0-degree global warming. So the adaptation challenge, yes, it will become larger as global warming grows. The loss and damage, as Yusuf said, this area or this space between mitigation, decreasing the amount of global warming and adaptation, decreasing our vulnerability, that central space of loss and damage will grow. But there's plenty of room for adaptation in any of these scenarios. On the last point, decision-making under uncertainty on platforms and terminology, yes, there is room for a little less, as Yusuf very rightly pointed out, a little less of a fractured landscape in terms of our platforms and knowledge-sharing mechanisms. We're hoping UNEP, together with UNFCCC and other such sort of global bodies, to try and address that to some extent. At the same time, a fractured, you could look at it the other way. Synergies can be negative. There's some room for like all kinds of bubbling up of ideas and groups, and the adaptation challenge may be assisted by a diversity of approaches and a diversity of thinking. So it's sort of a two-edged sword. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And we're now 2 minutes over for getting our coffee. If people would allow us to go just a few minutes more, it would be great to get just a couple of minutes responses from each of our other panelists, please.
I think most of the questions which arose were more at the institutional levels, the mechanisms which are there. Nonetheless, I think what is important is a few of the processes which are going around, and that particularly, towards the question that Salim was talking about, that there's a need for this linkage between institutional different institutions which are working on that. I think that is very important. I would like to say that particularly in the context of mountains, at the end of this year, ICIMOD is going to organize a large conference which looks into this, and in a certain way links up to what Yusuf was showing in his slide for loss and damage discourse, knowledge generation and then the sharing and working towards the institutional mechanisms. I think we need to connect in each of these activities which are going on, because that's the first step towards bringing about this networking.
Thank you very much. Yusuf?
Thank you, Eric. Not much to add from my side. Certainly the work of Provia would be very welcome in the deliberations on the long-term global goal. As you probably know, there's a dialogue on the review that's being created now, and will come up with its outcomes in 2015 in time to feed into the comprehensive agreement. And there will be ways for contribution from the outside world, and I suppose Provia will be at the forefront of the entities contributing there by virtue of the nature of its work. What's happening on mitigation? Like I said, mitigation is also in the process of being scaled up. Mitigation is the ultimate long-term adaptation measure, so certainly not forgotten at all. The regime we're looking for that will emerge in 2015 is one that is likely to include the whole world, taking, of course, into account the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, but one that is capable of achieving the objective of the convention in accordance with this long-term goal that's being deliberated upon. So hopefully we're going on the right track there. Yes, common platforms are, or just one common platform is what I've been trying to portray as being needed and essential in this scaled-up adaptation regime. I do not think the way we've been working so far with each sectoral institution, each thematic institution on its own, generating its knowledge and working from a supply-driven perspective, I don't think this will survive much longer in the context of the direction we're moving at with this massively scaled up adaptation work that's coming up, but rather we will all continue to work, but in a much more consolidated manner and very vigilant of where our knowledge is feeding into, in a way that will enable the countries to plan very well for their adaptation actions in the medium and long term. So I think we will need to establish much more focused dialogues on this matter, both with regional institutions and among thematic ones, and preemptively, hopefully, before it becomes too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our speakers. There's about 25 minutes for the coffee break before the parallel sessions start, so let's thank all of our speakers before we leave.